Happy 4th of July to everyone out there. I hope everyone is going to have a fun and, of course, safe celebration this year. As you know, 4th of July coming up on Tuesday is a day that stirs up feelings of unity and pride and joy across this great country of ours. It's certainly a great time to appreciate the freedoms and opportunities that this great nation provides. No other place on the planet does that. And as we reflect on this holiday, I want to sort of take you back a little bit, share some memories of my past 4th of Julys, and this might help to maybe stir up your own memories of some of the 4th of Julys that you recall. So we're going to take you back a little bit to me as a young child. Now, it was really just kind of yesterday, not really, but I grew up in a small town in Maine. And as you might well imagine, small towns have a really great celebration when it comes to these types of holidays, right? 4th of July parades, everything comes alive, a lot of patriotic decorations, tons of community activities. And then as children, I remember kind of sitting on the sidewalk, on the curb, joining the parade and maybe trying to catch some candy, running after the floats that were throwing out candy. That was always a big thing. And so it was very fun. And I remember even in high school being in the marching band, and we would do the 4th of July parade. So it was a great sense of community, a great sense of unity, camaraderie, probably things that are lacking in today's world, because it always brought such a strong connection with the rest of the town. So one of the memories of what we would do during the 4th of July weekend is after the parade, we would go off. My aunt and uncle had a little cabin on a lake in just outside of Augusta, an area called Belgrade Lakes. If you've ever been, it's beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Exactly what you would expect of Maine. Beautiful, serene lake. And on the other side of the lake, there was sort of some rolling hills. They weren't quite mountains, but rolling hills. Just a beautiful, kind of one of those postcard types of pictures. And then July, or the July 4th, in Maine, marked the start of summer. And so that would be the time where you would attempt to jump into the lake. And if you've ever jumped into a lake in New England, even in the summer, it's really, really cold. So anyway, just some memories that we thought that we would share with you all to hopefully maybe stimulate some of those memories for you as well. What did you do as a child growing up that was memorable for this holiday? Certainly, that's a lot of what family time and holidays are all about. And at the end of the day, some of our best memories don't really require spending a lot of money, right? I mean, that memory, kids sitting watching a parade and jumping in a lake, it doesn't require a lot of memory, but other memories certainly do. And of course, that's what we talk about here on the program, where we help you make sense out of all of life's decisions involving your dollars. So welcome on into Dollars and Cents. My name, of course, is Joel Garris. I'm a certified financial planner, certified financial fiduciary at Nelson Financial Planning, where we've got a great team of people, all of whom happen to be certified financial fiduciaries as well, and they stand ready this week to help you change your life with a successful and cost-effective financial plan. Speaking of things that are cost-effective, have you checked out the price of fireworks lately? You see all these tents that, sort of popping up everywhere. If you've been to one of those tents, and I have been to those tents many a time, because if you recall, I have 3 boys. And so when boys, they kind of like to have things blow up. I would always use sort of the 3-foot long, it's almost like a propane torch, if you will. I think actually what its intended purpose is actually to kill the weeds in the driveway as you burn the weeds down. I, on the other hand, use it as a safety mechanism for lighting fireworks. And so that way it's, like I'm still 3 feet away when I'm lighting the fireworks. But anyway, it's amazing how much money these fireworks cost. And if you look at the total in aggregate, about $2.5 billion gets spent by Americans every year on fireworks. So maybe you want to load up this year. Remember, at the end of the day, if you're loading up on the fireworks at one of these tents and spending the amount of money, because they really are expensive when you go in and look at them, and they always do like these, buy two, get the third one free, but they're so marked up. It's just unbelievable. But remember that as you're doing that, it is a want, not necessarily a need, right? And we get it. I mean, sometimes our wants become needs, especially on such a great memory-filled holiday as the 4th. And that's okay, right? As long as it doesn't happen in every financial decision where you're making your wants easily convert to needs and spending money on them in a dramatic fashion. One of the things that we're going to talk about on the program is some of the big tax changes that have impacted your retirement directly and your ability to spend money on fireworks. And certainly when we think about it, it really is so confusing, all of the different changes that were out there. The latest piece of legislation that was passed that had to deal with retirement had over 90 different changes in it. And we're going to hone in on one of those that particularly impacts people that are over a certain age. So if you are over the age of now 73, or if you know somebody who is, you really want to listen on in to this part of the program, because this is a pretty major part, or a major change, if you will, and it has to deal with your required minimum distribution. So what that is just to recap, the required minimum distribution is a mechanism that basically says the government is forcing you to take money out of your retirement accounts because that money in there has never been taxed, and the U.S. government would like its share of the taxes on that money. So the required minimum distribution, in essence, forces you to do that. The required minimum distribution, however, has one of the most significant penalties associated with it in the tax code if you do not take it. And that penalty is 50%. So that's a pretty significant penalty when you stop and think about it, right? Hear that one again. If you don't take the amount that you should have been taking as your required minimum distribution, you're going to have to pay 50% of that amount as a penalty. Plus, by the way, the amount you just took out is also taxable. So you can almost get pretty close to having the entire amount of the distribution disappear if you do not take it. Now, here's the reality. This particular provision of the tax code was not enforced all that dramatically. But when you start to parse through some of the changes that have happened with this rule, the reality is that we would expect that to get enforced at a much higher level. And that change in rule is what we're going to focus on in terms of the required minimum distribution and the new rules that apply that dramatically affect how you perceive that required distribution. So we'll talk about all of that when we return here on Dollars and Cents with Joel Garris of Nelson Financial Planning. Welcome back to the program. Happy 4th of July weekend. Not quite the 4th, but with the 4th falling on a Tuesday this year, it's kind of like the whole weekend is sort of one big lead up to the big day on Tuesday. We hope you enjoy the day, celebrate with friends and family. On the program, we're sharing a little of our memories of the 4th of July in the hopes that maybe it stimulates your memories as well. One of the memories that I have with the boys and here in Florida is ultimately we were, back when we were raising the boys, we lived in more the downtown area of Orlando. So what we would do is a big neighborhood event, and I'm sure it probably still happens today. I still have friends in that neighborhood. And so what you would do is you would kind of load up everything And for us, it was a kind of a red wagon, red radio flyer wagon. And so you would load it up with the chairs and the sparklers for the kids, and ultimately haul it all over. And for us, we live very close to Lake Cherokee, so that allowed us to see the fireworks perfectly fine without having to kind of get into the massive crowds that is around that Lake Eola region. So certainly a very nice neighborly or neighborhood type of activity that was a big part of 4th of July as we saw the kids, the boys grow up and be able to spend time with their friends and engage in watching the fireworks. So hopefully you have a fun memory like that, or maybe you're creating a very similar one today. We encourage you to take a moment and reflect on the joy and the pride that comes with celebrating this great country of ours birthday here on the 4th of July. So before the break, we were talking about this change to the required minimum distribution rules. I want to make sure that you all understand that it's a pretty significant penalty. It's actually one of the biggest penalties in the tax code, if not the biggest, that applies if you do not take it. And so the rules are that if you are above a certain age, then you must take out a certain amount of money from your retirement accounts. And so the ages, interestingly, have changed quite a bit. It used to be 70 and a half, then it was 72. This year it is 73. In the year 2033, that age will go up to actually 75 for that required minimum distribution. But here's the thing, that draconian penalty of the 50% was never really enforced per se, but based upon the changes that happened in the Secure Act, one of the many that were in there, we suspect that we're going to see much more enforcement. And here's why. Because that penalty that was 50% is now reduced down to 25%. So it's not as crazy, if you will, of an amount of a penalty. But you can drop it even lower than that to sort of the standard 10% penalty that typically applies if you take money out of your accounts, out of your retirement accounts early, sort of before 59 and a half. It's only 10% if you correct it in a timely manner. So that timely manner is viewed as within 2 years from the end of the year in which the required minimum distribution should have been taken. So as a result of this change in these penalties, we suspect that you're going to see much more enforcement on this. And not only that, but the IRS has also added in sort of a statute of limitations that says that there's a look back period of time of 3 years for a missed required minimum distribution and 6 years for an excess contribution. So I suspect because of the way that these sort of rules were changed that we're going to see much greater enforcement on it. And so that means that you really need to be much more aware of ultimately how that required minimum distribution is calculated and what goes into that. So one of the things that we encourage people to do is we encourage people to ultimately really take and automate that required minimum distribution calculation and distribution. We actually go so far as to engage in sort of a call-out program where we reach out to people or clients of Nelson Financial Planning to ultimately help them make sure that they are taking their required minimum distribution, because you don't want to be short on this because it's a pretty significant penalty. So we engage in sort of at Nelson Financial Planning, we engage in sort of a call-out of, oh, you haven't taken your RMD, or oh, you've got a little bit left and we need to take the remaining balance out. That's certainly something that we do. And certainly your financial institution or financial advisor should be doing something very similar to that. If they don't, then you might want to ask why. But the reality is that the best way to sort of solve that so you don't run into any issues, because again, we think that the enforcement on this is going to increase, is to go ahead and automate that. So sort of the to-do, if you will, on the plate is to make sure that you have automated that required minimum distribution, that calculation, and ultimately that distribution, because that's a good way to make sure that you do not avoid the penalty. Because That way, if you avoid the penalty, right, then you have more money to spend on fireworks and all those kinds of things. So anyway, welcome into the program where we help you make sense out of all those different decisions involving your dollars. Hopefully you're not going to overspend on those fireworks and create that want as more of a need, because it's really, there's a big difference between the two, that is for sure. Interestingly, when you think about this period of time in the year, we're sort of at the halfway point, right? If you stop and think about it, June just ended and July has begun, and that means that we're sort of at that turning point in terms of where the year is. So I guess the question is, how are you doing on those New Year's resolutions, right? I mean, do you even remember what they were? Well, during this midpoint of the year, what we like to do at the office at Nelson Financial Planning is that we always do sort of a mid-year conference call of things to just kind of go over where we are at this point in the year and how things are progressing along, because it's a great time to sort of reflect. Maybe you're on track with your personal goals and your financial goals, but maybe you're not. And with half the year left, there's still a lot of time to be able to sort of address that. So we hosted one of those calls this past week, and certainly some interesting things that were discussed. If you think about the impact that is COVID really did sort of tip the balance, or really tip the scales in terms of capital or capital asset allocation. So capital, or basically capital is a fancy word for money. Money goes to sort of where the opportunities are. And when capital is cheap, capital doesn't pass as tough a judgment on whether that money is getting used in profitable ways or not, right? When it's cheap money, then you don't really kind of go through the analysis quite as much as perhaps you should when you're making those decisions on how to allocate capital. So you think of COVID and you think of the U.S. government, and think of it like, kind of the scales, like the scales of judiciary, right? And basically with COVID, because there was so much money sort of pumped in, you had government really kind of tipping those scales and reallocating that capital to very different locations than perhaps it might have gone had people actually really had a cost of that capital. So that's what a lot of the mid-year conference call that we did with our clients was all about, is to kind of talk through that. And more importantly, what sort of are the long-term investment implications? And we think that the biggest part of that is that in this environment that's going to be higher interest rates and higher inflation going forward, it's not going to be an environment where you have such cheap capital or cheap money floating all around, and that raises all boats. So it doesn't matter whether you're a good company, bad company, making good decisions or not. Kind of the tide's rising, and you're doing fine as a business. The problem becomes when folks take a harder look at how that capital is getting allocated. And what's interesting is that we see that happening across the board more so now. So it's going to be crucially important from an investing perspective that you really focus on a little bit more about what you own. And it's not going to be enough to just sort of own the market or own tech stocks. You've really got to be intentional on what it is that you own inside your portfolio in that environment. So with that, we'll take a break here on Dollars and Cents with Joel Garris of Nelson Financial Planning. Halfway through the year, 4th of July coming up around the corner. How are you doing in meeting your financial goals for the year? You're on track? Are you off track? Well, the reality is it's not too late to get back on track. Certainly the turning point in the year is a great reason to re-look at all of those things that you plan to do this year. Still plenty of time left in the year to be able to do it, but the days do pass very quickly. So we want to encourage people to take a look at those financial goals that they had to try and get back on track if you've become off track. And certainly on the program, with it being 4th of July weekend, we're sharing some stories about memories on the 4th of July. And we hope that you have a very fun period of time here over the weekend celebrating this great country of ours. So some great memories. We hope you are creating some great memories as well, whether that be raising kids and taking them to see the fireworks with the neighbors, all of those fun things. And so certainly one of the things that seems ubiquitous out there that you hear an awful lot about, besides it being a holiday weekend, is one of the things that you hear about for many years is this notion of investing in index funds. It seems like that's all that everybody talks about these days. And so you got so many folks that are really focused on talking about index funds and how they work, and they're so much better than any other outcome out there. And a lot of people are persuaded to use them and ultimately invest in them. But there's certainly some things to consider. And we understand sort of that need to sort of hit the easy button, right? Because we see it all the time as we're driving around, just sort of in the number of fast food restaurants, right? I mean, between when you leave your office and when you get home, you probably pass a dozen different drive-throughs, and each one of them offering a little different kind of food, if you will, or food options. And we've all been there, right? Long day at work and ultimately looking to grab some food rather than get home and do dinner prep, and the kids have a baseball game and the schedule is very full. So we go through those drive-throughs and we certainly save time, but I guess at the end of the day, how do you feel, right? After the meal is done and over with, you kind of know, I think we all know that, when someone's handing you food out a window and you're sitting in your car, that's probably not the healthiest thing on the planet for you. And so ultimately what you've done there, right, is you have traded convenience for quality. You've paid for it and you've sacrificed your health. And I think indexed investing, as popular as it is, certainly has a lot of parallels to that concept, because there are certainly some major costs, just as there are when you choose sort of the unhealthy but yet quick drive-through. There is a cost when you own index funds. And so one of the things that we're going to say next is going to come as a surprise. But if you think about it, it's absolutely the case. Index funds will never perform as well as the index that they are tracking. Let me say that again. Index funds will never perform as well as the index that they are tracking. They will always underperform the index. It doesn't matter how good that index fund is. It doesn't matter how cheap or low the expenses are inside that fund. By its very nature, by the presence of any expense versus the index, and anytime you have an index fund, there has to be an expense, because it does take someone to put all of those portfolio holdings together to make up the fund, then at the end of the day, there's always going to be an expense, which means then that if I've got a fund that has all the holdings of the index, but yet there's an expense, well, then the math would say, well, then it's never going to do as well. It's always going to underperform, and it's certainly never going to overperform. So that's sort of the reality check, if you will, on these index funds. Make no mistake, they're very popular. They're as popular as your favorite drive-through window, but they certainly do have some negatives associated with them. I think people forget along the way. They kind of choose the easy button, choose the convenient. Okay, and certainly there's a lot of money that has flowed into index funds. If you look at the past 4 years, 2018 to 2022, the amount of money in passively managed index funds over doubled. That's a tremendous growth of money that is pouring into something that, when you stop and think about it, is always going to be a subpar product for how it is billed. But the amount of people that are putting money in, almost as busy as the Chick-fil-A drive-through on a Saturday afternoon, right? And certainly we've all been there on that. A lot of people, but you're really kind of paying for convenience. The other thing, too, that you have to remember on an index fund is that you don't control any of the holdings, or should I say nobody controls the holdings that are in the fund, because they are designed to perfectly match the index as its own. So what that means is that if there's a company in that index that you're like, wait a minute, it doesn't make any sense to own this company because it doesn't really have any earnings, or the price is really, really high, or it's not running a particularly good business. You don't have any say in whether you're going to own that particular company or not. If it's part of the index, then you're going to own it inside the index. So much like the convenience, maybe you're okay with paying more to always get less, but we think that's a bad proposition. So we want to encourage folks this week to sort of take a look at that and look at the role of index funds in your own personal portfolio. Are you utilizing them for the bulk of your portfolio? Is that really what your portfolio is designed to do? And what's crazy about this, and we see this all the time, is that a lot of people in the financial advisory business will use them and then layer investment management or advisory fees on top of them, which is just even more incredulous. That, first of all, you've got a product that's never going to perform as well as the index that it's supposed to replicate. It's always going to underperform. It will never overperform. And then someone is layering on an additional fee or expense just so you can own that. It boggles the mind, some of the things that we see on a regular basis. Look, the important thing is to always know what you own and make sure that you're getting what you are paying for. Hey, if you like the Chick-fil-A #1, we get it. It's good stuff, but it's not perhaps as good as what you might otherwise be eating if you had the time to put together a well-balanced meal. And so consequently, we think that analogy to that fast food approach and that index investing is very, very close. So we encourage folks to really take a moment and look at their portfolio. At Nelson Financial Planning, we like to sort of run what we refer to as sort of a Morningstar. Morningstar is a big third-party independent, kind of analysis company. And we ultimately use reports that help run x-rays on our client portfolios to see how they are doing, to ultimately understand what the underlying mix is and what the underlying investments are. So certainly that's something that you want to be doing on a regular basis. You really should be drilling into your portfolio, or if you have an advisor, that they should be doing that. And if they're not, well, then, our website is nelsonfinancialplanning.com. Go visit us and reach out to us on the Contact Us page and see if we can help. Because the reality is you want to be drilling down into that portfolio to see how you are doing based upon that relative performance. So certainly some of the things to be thinking about this 4th of July weekend. With that, we're going to take a break and continue here on Dollars and Cents with Joel Garris of Nelson Financial Planning. Well, we hope you're enjoying the show this week, spending a little bit of time sharing some memories about our past 4th of Julys. We hope that you are making some new memories for yourself and your family. One of our fondest memories is with the kids when they were younger, going over to Lake Cherokee, which is sort of a gem that is nestled in the heart of Florida with a beautiful scenic backdrop of downtown Orlando. and ultimately you're surrounded by neighbors and families and friends, and so it was this sort of spirit of togetherness and community that makes the 4th of July so special for me on a personal note, and we hope that same is true for you. The reality, of course, is that there's always things that are lurking out there in the background, and so we're going to give you a little bit of a warning, if you will, about this particular holiday weekend, because as with any holiday weekends, what we see is that the perpetration of elder fraud, internet fraud, is at its peak. And what's interesting about this, you would say, well, that's why would they be peaking in terms of the criminal activity involving elder fraud and internet fraud and those kinds of things? And well, the reality is that most of the criminals and fraudsters aren't celebrating the 4th of July, right? They're in places like Russia or North Korea or Iran, and so they don't have the 4th of July over there. That's sort of an American holiday. And so the other thing that they know is, well, they know the calendar, and they know that, well, those Americans are celebrating the 4th of July. Maybe they're celebrating a little bit too much, and if we hit them with a scheme, perhaps they will be more susceptible to falling prey to whatever scheme it is that we are doing. And because here's the reality of on the numbers. Internet crime, elder fraud is just an unbelievable growth business, because, and you have to understand that it is a business for the people that are on the other side doing it, because that's what supports rogue regimes like North Korea or Iran, and that's where a lot of the fraud is originated from. The reality is that last year, according to the 2022 FBI Elder Fraud Report, which is a report, sadly, that they have to publish every year to kind of put all the statistics together, and the statistics continue to grow. There was an 84% increases in losses from 2022 to over 2021. So within 1 year is an 84% increase. These numbers are just staggering, right? And the total losses were over $3 billion. Number of victims over 88,000 that were over the age of 60. Here are the numbers, and really these are so significant numbers. $35,000 was the average loss per victim, and roughly about 10% of the fraud involved losses more than 100,000. And I'm sure you're very familiar, because I know that these stories are quite rampant in terms of people that have become victim. We've got I remember my neighbor's mother. She was victimized by a scam that had to deal with her grandson supposedly calling her and saying he was in trouble in a foreign land, and she needed to send money and wire money immediately. Years and years ago, we had a client. This was kind of early on, actually, as I think about it, in terms of kind of how these frauds would perpetuate themselves, that really believed that she had won the lottery in Canada. And all she had to do was just pay the taxes now, and then she would get the check. Well, in her case, it was a couple $100,000. I mean, imagine that just completely disappearing because you've been victimized by someone who has convinced you of something that simply is not true. We had another incident. Christina and I were talking about it in the office, where this woman had been victimized in a compassion scheme, where someone, becomes your friend and boyfriend or whatever the case may be, and ultimately in this particular person's case, they wound up losing their house. Stop and think about that. She had to live in a hotel for a period of time because she had inadvertently signed the deed of her house over to this particular person. And then this person went ahead and sold the house, and she discovered all of this happened when the new buyers of the house showed up to move in. I mean, this is just horrific in terms of how these stories play out. And the reality is that holiday weekends definitely show a spike in these types of activities. So, look, ultimately, there are things that you can do to hopefully avoid becoming a victim, and more importantly, things that you need to do if you have become a victim. So we'll start with the stuff that you can do to reduce down the amount of opportunity that folks have to ultimately wind up cheating you out of your money. And it goes without saying that that involves protecting your personal information, making sure that you protect incoming and outgoing email. Because one of the things that we talked about, and we were joined by Ron Cervantes of C Solutions a couple of months ago on the program, where we talked a lot about this. So we would encourage you to go to our YouTube channel or our various podcast channels and check out that episode, because we really did talk a lot about some of the things that you can do to help protect yourself. If you have any trouble finding sort of our channels on any of your favorite podcasts or YouTube platforms, go to our website. It's nelsonfinancialplanning.com. And in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see a bunch of icons. Click on those. They'll immediately connect you over to these past episodes. Look for the one, and I really should probably remember the date, but I don't remember it off the top of my head. It was a couple months ago. It was a month, and ultimately we were joined for the entire show by a special guest where we talk through some of these things that you can do to help you avoid the possibility of becoming victim to identity theft. And certainly it also deals with protecting your personal information, but more importantly, be careful out there on the internet. Be careful out there when it comes to emails. Be careful out there when you're getting, nowadays, it's phone calls, it's texts, it's just completely bizarre stuff. I actually got a text just this past week with someone showing me a bottle of wine in their hand, and I was like, oh, that's a good bottle of wine, and and I was about ready to respond to it, not thinking, and then I happened to mention it to Kristen at the office, and she said she's gotten the same text. And so those are the things that you've really got to be very careful about. So really make sure that you're taking the steps to avoid fraud, particularly during the course of a holiday weekend. Well, speaking of holidays, we certainly hope you have a good 4th of July. We got to wrap it on up and get on out of here. If you like what you heard and want to learn more, go to our website, nelsonfinancialplanning.com. Fill out the Contact Us box to schedule an absolutely free conversation of how we can help you here at Nelson Financial Planning. Enjoy the rest of the day.